Continuing from part 1 of this video tutorial, in this tutorial I demonstrate how to restore a WordPress website using Akeeba Kickstart and Akeeba Backup Core. The process described here will work if you're restoring your website from one location on your remote host to another location. It also works if you're restoring your website to another location on a local server, as well as restoring a website from your local computer to your host or from your host to your local computer. The process involves creating a new folder in the destination where you want to restore your website, and then placing in that folder two files, Akeeba Kickstart.php and your JPA file that was created when you made a backup using Akeeba Backup Core. So the first step is to point your browser to the location of your Kickstart file. In this case, it's on my remote host, hosted by SiteGround, in a folder called Backup 6. And I've placed a copy of Kickstart.php there, and I've pointed my browser to that file, and I get this screen here. Please read this screen. Kickstart is not an installer. It's an archive extraction tool. Kickstart is not the only way to extract the backup archive, but I found that it's the easiest way for students and beginners to restore a website, a WordPress website. Kickstart is bound by your server's configuration. As such, it may not work at all. So in this case, I've tested this pretty thoroughly using Bitnami local servers and Bluehost and SiteGround web hosting services. Other hosting services, you may need to check with the configuration, the way they've set up your website, if this Kickstart restoration does not work. You should download and upload your archive files using FTP in binary transfer mode. Any other method could lead to corrupt backup. Post-restoration site load errors are usually caused by htaccess or PHPMyAdmin directives, so I include another video tutorial that goes over common problems with this restoration process. Kickstart overwrites files without a warning. If you're not sure that you are okay with that, do not continue. Trying to restore to the temporary URL of a CPanel host will lead to restoration failure, and your site will appear to be not working. This is normal and is just how your server and CMS software work. And number 8, you're supposed to read the documentation before using the software. Most issues can be avoided or easily worked around by understanding how this software works. So see a previous tutorial for instructions on how to get that documentation for Akeeba Kickstart. The text does not imply that there is a problem detected. It's standard text displayed every time you launch Kickstart. So go ahead and read through that and then click on the link there. That'll take you to the Akeeba Kickstart Core starter page. At the time of this recording, version 3.8.0 was the latest version of Akeeba Kickstart. Your first task is to select the archive file that you'd like to restore. I like to place the archive file in the same folder as Kickstart.php, and that way it shows up, the correct file shows up right here in the Select Backup Archive Step 1, and you don't need to do anything. In terms of the select and extraction method, choose directly. Since the files are there already on the server, you don't need to FTP them anywhere. And then go ahead and in the fine-tune section, accept the defaults. Later on, if you have problems, you may be directed to change the values here in the minimum or maximum execution time. But for now, click on the Start button. And then don't close this window while the extraction is in process. So Kickstart now has extracted all the files. Then go ahead and run the installer when you get to this screen. That will open up ANGIE, Akeeba Next Generation Installer Engine. And this is the first important screen right here. One of the reasons why I recommend using Bitnami servers or SiteGround or Bluehost hosting is I've tested it pretty thoroughly on those servers, and usually I get yeses in all of the pre-installation checks here. All these settings here must be green, or you're more likely to run into problems with the restoration. And then the recommended settings, it's better if these are all green, but they don't have to be. For example, display errors is turned on, and they recommend that you turn it off. And SFTP support is off, and it recommends that it be on. But I've run this restoration many times with several of these orange, and I had no problems. In terms of backup information, you might want to write this information down: your host name, backup date, Akeeba backup version, and then the PHP version. You can also view the README file if you'd like more information about this. Often what you'll want to do is go ahead and run through the defaults. If everything is okay, great, but if you run into problems, you'll want to go back and perhaps read more documentation, read the README file, make alterations in the places where I recommend doing them as we run through this restoration. For now, everything is good, so let's go back here and click on the blue Next button. And now you'll need to restore the site's main database. So you'll need to stop here, and now you're going to need to create a database on your host or on your local server, depending on where you're trying to restore this to. If you are restoring to your remote host, log into your host's CPanel and look for one of two programs, either a MySQL Database Wizard or PHPMyAdmin. I'll show you how to use either tool to create a database, but it's easier if you have a wizard to go ahead and click on the wizard. You just enter in the new database name using their prefix. So I'm going to call this backup 6. Since this is my 6th backup, click on Next Step. And I'm going to go ahead and create a username of the same name, backup 6, with my prefix. Enter a password. Now you're going to want to write all these passwords and usernames down, because one of the most common mistakes I run in with my students is they forget these passwords and usernames. Go ahead and create the user. Now you're going to want to create a user with all privileges, so make sure that everything is checked, like so, and click on Next Step. And that's all there is to it. You now have a new database with this name right here. You have a user with the same name and a password. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that name, because I'm going to use it twice now, back here in ANGIE. For database type, select MySQL from the drop-down. Database server host name will be localhost. Username, go ahead and paste in the username you just copied. Enter the password, and then also paste in the database name. So this is how you'll generate your database username and password if your host has a database wizard. Now, if your host doesn't have a database wizard, or if you're trying to restore a site on a local Bitnami server, you'll need to use a program called PHPMyAdmin to create your databases. So go back to CPanel Home, and in your CPanel, look for a program called PHPMyAdmin. That's going to be in the Databases section of the CPanel. It looks like this. Double-click on that to open it. Usually, this will ask you for another password. In this case, I've already logged in, so it didn't. Now, there are a lot of different versions of PHPMyAdmin, so you may need to adjust your actual steps compared to what I'm showing you. Let me demonstrate where this would be on Bitnami. So if you go to your Macintosh hard drive if you're on the Mac, or go to the Windows C drive, you'll see a folder called Bitnami. Here on the Mac, it's in the Applications folder, and then I'm using a WordPress 4.0 stack. So look for a program called Manager.osx for the Mac. This will be Manager OS for Windows. Again, this will be on your C drive for Windows. And then make sure, obviously, that your servers are running. And then once they're running, open PHPMyAdmin. So you'll notice that this one may look a little bit different than the one on my host, but the process is exactly the same. The idea is you want to create a database, and if you don't have a database wizard, you'll need to use this program, PHPMyAdmin. Now, the version of PHPMyAdmin that ships with your Bitnami server looks like this, and it's going to ask you for a username and password. Then the username is going to be root. It's not well documented, but that's what it will be if you're running a Bitnami WordPress stack or a MAMP or WAMP stack. The password will be whatever you use to set up your Bitnami server. So I have mine written down, so I'm going to type mine in and press go. So slight differences between your host's PHPMyAdmin on your remote server and your local server running under Bitnami. So this is what it will look like, PHPMyAdmin. You'll just click on the databases link right here, and that'll take you to a screen where you can go ahead and create your database and then your username and your password. Whichever method you use to generate your database user and password, put the information here in the connection information, leave the advanced options to default, and click on Next. Often this is a sticking point here with students in that if you didn't put in your connection information correctly, you'll get an error here. Usually the error is cannot connect to database. Either the database name is incorrect, the username is incorrect, or the password. In this case, database restoration was successful. It was able to find my new database and then restore it. Click on Next Step. Now it's going to ask you for a site name. Good idea to say Teaching Site Backup 6 so you can identify this backup. Tagline, my WordPress blog. Now the WordPress address and site address, this can cause problems, and I've noticed that with the WordPress restoration, sometimes it loses track of where your new website is. So you may need to go back and modify or remove this setting here, or you may need to adjust some configuration files to help the browser find the correct website. But more on that in another tutorial where I cover common troubleshooting tips for using Akeeba Backup. But go ahead and write down the database character set, database collation, if anything. Super user settings is another area of potential problems. You'll want to enter in your email address, which isn't that critical unless this is going to be your final website. And then this is important that you have the right email address in here. Probably the most important is your password. And you'll want to, again, write that down. Now there's some confusion between this password and your database password. The database password, you only need it if you need to get access to your database through, let's say, PHPMyAdmin. Your super user settings here, this is your admin password to get into the back end, to the dashboard. So if you don't remember, or if you mess this up, your restored site is pretty useless because you can't get into the back end of it. So go ahead and jot down your admin, which is the super user, password, and email, and click on Next. Akeeba then goes through and finishes the restoration. You can read this screen. Even though your site has been successfully restored, differences in server configuration over time or between different servers of the same or different hosts can cause issues with your restored file. So they cannot provide support for such issues. They have collected the most common problems and causes and their solutions in their troubleshooting documentation. For your convenience, we're providing you with this link right here. So you may want to check that link out if you're having problems. You may also want to subscribe if you're finding that this does work for you, but occasionally you have problems or you're kind of concerned that you have more tech support. You can subscribe to their backup services to the professional or pro account. Now, if you're using Akeeba Kickstart or an integrated restoration of Akeeba Backup, you can just close this browser window. Otherwise, you need to click this button to remove the installation folder. So we're using Akeeba Kickstart, so we can just close this window. You can go back to Akeeba Kickstart Core here, and notice that there's a cleanup button. So you click on that. That'll clean up all the installation files so that the website will work. Now using kickstart.php on WordPress, this does not work for me. This takes me actually to the Joomla address. So instead, click on the Visit Your Site's front end, and this is kind of the moment of truth. If your site appears as an exact clone or copy of your original site, then you know that the restoration has proceeded successfully. Things to look for here are missing pages, extensions that are not working, maybe the theme isn't working. Sometimes what you'll see here is just a jumble of HTML and no CSS. The site's there, but it just looks terrible because none of the styling is there. That indicates a problem with the pathing. During the restoration, there was some confusion about where some of the files are now located. So if you run into any of these problems, check out the help documentation that comes with Akeeba Backup, or view my supplementary video that reviews common problems with restoring WordPress websites using Akeeba Backup Core. So this looks good. The front end is all here. Now let's visit the back end by simply appending to the end wp-admin. And now you'll get to the login screen, and you'll need to remember, or you would need to have written down your username and password. That's the super user, and mine was admin as such. So go ahead and log in, and now I'm in the back end. So this is kind of pretty much proof that everything got restored correctly, and now I have a direct clone of my website here in a new folder on my SiteGround host. So this is very good validation then that the restoration was performed successfully, because everything here on my back end is working, and I've successfully restored my original site to a new location on my host located in the backup 6 folder.